A quick well, we're off to a flying start there. A quick explanation of the two series I have here on my channel that are dedicated to specific killers. My How to Fix series is a series about making what I consider at the time of making them to be realistic changes that could and should be made in order to solve a problem with said killer. Whether that be too weak, too strong, unfun, or what have you, it's all about setting realistic expectations, regardless of what you or I believe about how realistic those videos are. For example, I think my original How to Fix Trapper was way overdone and did entirely too much, but at the time, it was my genuine opinion on what should be done. But just because these videos are what I realistically expect, it doesn't mean it's necessarily the rework I want for them. For example, my Legion video is my attempt to compromise with Legion mains so they can keep their fast-paced stabby-stabby bullshit, while I attempted to fix the absolute snore fest that is an unavoidable mending simulator every 30 seconds for a 30-minute match. My actual dream rework would be to make Legion more of a trap-based killer using the other three members, but that's an entirely different video. Changing a killer's playstyle too drastically leads to outrage and a harm of the player base. Take the most recent Skull Merchant changes, for example. A lot of people, including Skull Merchant mains and Skull Merchant haters alike, have declared this the death of the character because her playstyle has changed so drastically. Going from a 3-gen or chase killer to a zoning killer is a complete shift in playstyle, and it's caused a lot of problems and uproar. And if you want my full thoughts on it, I do have a video on the channel from a few days ago. On the other hand, you have my Dearly Designed series, where the videos are about killers I think are good or fine in their current states, only talking about very minor changes, if any, in an attempt to create a little more positivity on a channel that is mostly bitching. The Dearly Designed videos are, in all actuality, a break for both me and you guys, because being angry constantly really isn't good for my heart and my mental. It's the whole reason I left Apex Legends, and I'll cut my balls off and shove them in a meat grinder before I let that kind of unrelenting anger take over when it comes to Deceased Before Dusk. But what happens when neither is the case? When I don't have a realistic implication of a solution for how to fix a killer, nor do I think the killer is well designed enough to make a video singing its praises. This is my problem series, which started recently with the Trapper, and today we talk about Nurse. In Monday's video, I mentioned that win streaks were not a valid talking point for how overtuned a killer is, and the reason that was Monday's video was so that I could avoid having to talk at length about it here. So instead, let's go over the Nurse, her issues, and whether or not a change is even possible without causing a lot of stress. The Nurse was made in a time where infinite loops were the norm. Now, I speak only from watching our Deatha videos, a Dead by Daylight historian I greatly recommend, and talking to veteran players, but Nurse's original introduction was meant for a time when other killers in the game just simply did not stand a chance. The obvious solution I can see through my big-ass telescope named the Hindsight 3000 was to fix the maps over introducing what would become and continue to be, almost 7 years later, the most powerful and oppressive killer in the game. Let's talk about match theory for a second. In an average Domino's booty hole destroyer match, there is a baseline dynamic. The killers must wait for a survivor's mistake and then punish that mistake. Killers like Trapper, Myers, and Freddy and so on have basically no choice but to wait out a mistake. These are M1 killers, and they have to basically learn an entire Ottstarver masterclass on how to mind game in order to force out mistakes. But higher tier killers like Pyramid Head, Oni, Plague, and more force mistakes to happen through threatening powers and the like. This is the reason Just Leave and Altruism is the best killer perk are such memes, because these are ultimate mistakes that survivors make on their own that essentially give the killers free wins or kills. Once a survivor makes a mistake, you capitalize on it and punish it. Mistakes for killers consist of either not punishing a survivor's misplay or not utilizing your power and perks to force the survivor into a misplay. But what happens when you have a killer who isn't rightly punished for both of these things? The recent Xenomorph nerf is thought by some to be too damning, which is ridiculous. She's still strong, and her spot on my tier list I made a couple weeks back hasn't moved, but now she's actually punished for missing tail attacks. Before, if you missed a tail attack, the survivors got no distance. So dodging a tail attack, essentially playing well on the survivor's part, wasn't rewarded, and instead the mere act of existing at any given loop against Xeno was considered a mistake, as Xeno could just spam the damn thing and never suffer for it, and in most cases even be rewarded with a down. A much more extreme case of this phenomenon is the Nurse. The Nurse's power is simple. You have 2 Blinks base kit, charge these Blinks and release the button to teleport a short distance, ignoring obstacles, survivors, and basic game logic. At the end of the blink, the Nurse can swing. Regardless on if she swings or not, the Nurse will enter a fatigue after either both Blinks have been used or a small window after the first blink is passed. The Nurse is the slowest killer in the game, sporting a 3.8 movement speed, which is slower than Survivor, so in order to do anything as Nurse, you must use your blinks. The blinks appear to have a punishment for messing them up. Using multiple blinks makes your fatigue and cooldown regen take longer. If you swing and miss with a blink attack, the fatigue is painfully long, and the Survivor should get a good bit of distance. But they don't. The Nurse is simply too forgiving. After a long fatigue and cooldown reset, the Nurse can simply use one blink to catch back up. Let's do some simple math. Her fully charged blink distance is disgustingly long, going a whopping 20 meters at 13.3 meters a second. To make this more clear, a Survivor runs at 4 meters a second. With a fatigue of 2 seconds and a recharge of 3 seconds within that time frame, the Survivor can make it 20 meters, and then boom! The Nurse is back on their heels before they even know what the fuck. All the distance gained is essentially nullified, and that's where our main problem comes in. Because of this dynamic, no downside, and constantly catching up to survivors with literally nothing to stand in her way, the Nurse's oppression is actually insane. When I was going to make this video, I was originally going to introduce a nerf to the Nurse where she only has one base kit blink, change her movement speed to 4.2, and make her work as an M1 killer with a brief lunge ability, basically. But then I realized the scenario I just described to you guys, where one blink is all she needs to catch up. So then what? We increase her fatigue, recharge time, shorten the blinks? How much would it viably take to bring the Nurse down to a reasonable level? In my tier list video, I mentioned that the Nurse is one of 3 S tier killers, but you guys gotta understand, the sheer difference in power level between the Nurse and the Blight, the second strongest killer in the game, is equivalent to the difference in power level between Pinhead and the Blight. It's a world of difference, and it's actually ridiculous. Blight will get his own video someday, but in the meantime, it's worth noting that even without his busted add-ons, Blight is still strong because his map presence is so ungodly insane. Blight can patrol the map and cause damage better than any other killer in the game, but also, the Blight forces mistakes by changing the way people approach loops with him. But the way Blight loses to Nurse is his mistakes can actually be punished. If he misses a swing or if he uses all of his rushes, he has a similar cooldown and regen to the Nurse, but physical barriers stop him from just heading in a straight shot to the Survivor. Because the Nurse can avoid obstacles and move extremely fast while doing so, that's why she's so oppressive. My second idea was to take away blinks entirely. Rework the Nurse. The Nurse is supposed to be based off of a ghost. That's why she floats and looks the way she does. So my thought was to rework her power to be a resource meter. She can hold down right click and become undetectable and not able to be physically touched, and move through walls and survivors and such with the penalty to movement speed and a short 1.5 second cooldown coming out of it before she could swing. She would be a 110 killer, 105 when she procs the power, and becomes a stealth killer of sorts. But the reason I scrapped this is the same reason I talked about earlier about not changing playstyles too much. And while I think my second idea is the optimal way to fix her, I understand the lack of realism in even implementing that idea. At the end of the day, the Nurse's oppressiveness is downright insanity, and she needs something done. But what can be done, I don't know. But let me know what you think down below. And as always, a special thank you to my channel members, Nuclear Bomb and Spirit Upgrades for the additional support. If you want to know how to get thanks at the end of videos, teasers for upcoming content, merch discounts, and more, hit the join button down below. And that's it for today, guys. I love you all, and I will see you in the next one.